Hey everyone, Rodney here at Cleves Tech, and today I'm going to be doing something a little different than my normal videos. As some of you may know, I've been working on LoRa's since I made the Flux Gym video, and I've decided to try to solve the problem that I've had with AI image generation models, and that is that they normally create plastic-looking miniature people, and I wanted to create tiny people. So this last week, I spent countless hours creating my first Miniature People LoRA. Now, the primary purpose is to not have them look plastic. Yes, Flux can already create tiny people, but they're gonna not look realistic. This video, I'm gonna cover how I created the LoRA and the process. Now, I'm not an expert on this stuff by far, and I tend to just dive in and experiment to figure things out sometimes. And I sometimes find new ways of doing things. So let's just dive in. I guess this isn't gonna give you anything like the definitive answer because I really don't have much of a clue what I'm doing yet. Especially the whole concept thing. I've only trained one concept before for somebody privately. Symbol they created for a sticker thing. So this was really first true one. And I had no idea how to approach it. I tend to approach things. My method is learn a tiny bit and then just go ahead, dive in and see what I can screw up. Sometimes I discover cool stuff when I do that. So there are benefits to that. So the first thing I did, I've been trying to do this for a year and a half. Finally, I decided, well, maybe I can get, I don't know, if I could train a LoRA easily. That was always the issue before, not knowing what settings to use and everything else. I just started using the CivitAI LoRA creator as well. I've created a few over the last year or so. To actually dive in this far, I finally decided that the only solution to not getting plastic looking, because that was the models always give you plastic looking people. So instead of getting the plastic looking people, I just said, well, what if I make a LoRA? Problem was getting source material. There's not a lot of images online or anything like that. If you search or if you look around, it's just everything always looks like a plastic person. And I think that's why the AI, when you prompt for it, you'd always get a plastic looking person. Rare occasions you might get something that looks somewhat realistic, but not good enough. So getting source material was very difficult. And I bounced around initially on what I tried just to get an idea of what worked, what didn't work. And so one of my first things was to start off with movies and then putting them into Resolve here. And then I just extracted, once I dropped the movie file in, I just went in to the export thing. Once you're in here, I just changed this to, was it PNG? I think it was, yeah. PNG, and then I chopped up the video a little bit. The parts of the movies that weren't little people, whatever. I got a few images, but after going through over a couple 100,000 frames and digging through, it wasn't really the greatest, but it did get me started. And funny thing was, once I had a few images going from there, and what I did was I cropped everything down. So I had to set up a new drive here just for that. And then once I was done, I had some cropped images to start with as a base. I figured that would work. Now, a couple of these ended up carrying over into my finals, like some of the other ones, and there was some bleed over basically from training and trying images and getting new source. A lot of my early images weren't that great. So these are some of my early creations. So as you can see, I wasn't really getting a lot of good stuff, but honestly, I want the model to look somewhat like it is now in my current iteration that I have out currently with version 1. It's pretty close. A lot of people have talked about adding more tilt shifts, things like that. Problem is, you go too far that direction, then they start looking fake again. I ended up with a lot of these early images, and some of them weren't too bad. And this was where the plaid started in. So I started going through. This one actually is last. This is one of my rare early ones that came out pretty good. And that's what I was striving for, was just to get a few good images. I didn't need a ton of them, I figured, early. I figured what I was going to do is build this up over time and put everything, one version, a little bit better than the next version, add a few more images. So that's what I did. So the problem with my method is if you're trying to do it all under a couple trainings, it's going to be harder. But obviously, if you have enough source material, that's what matters. So the problem I found is when I first started off, I started off with like 10 images. And my next one, I moved up to about 20 images, and I still used some of the originals. And then third, and I kept phasing out some of the old ones and adding all the best of the new ones. And from there, it started getting better as I was generating. I started getting some better ones. I started experimenting with trying to get some more detail, but also I ran into some issues with that. It didn't always work as well as I hoped. Now, these were some of my earlier images that I was getting. Not too bad, but not phenomenal. Not exactly what I was going for. You could still see some of the original stuff coming over as well. And the other problem I ran into is I couldn't get a consistent scale. I had hoped to try to keep all the original ones, everything is close to the same scale, and it would learn that, but that really didn't happen, not yet. Although I got ideas for that. See, I ended up training also on CivitAI as well. If you've never done that, you can go up and train a LoRA here, and you can earn credits on CivitAI, so you can do one of these every once in a while just by uploading images, sharing them, things like that. It's like if people post to my stuff, I usually tip them because I'm getting something out of it. So plus I like to see the images. So I always recommend when you do anything on CivitAI, post it to the model page, at least one image. But anyways, so I went into here, I went under concept, and I created one under here as well. The difference was the longer I created it on here, and I have to explore this, going through CivitAI, it kept getting smaller. And this was created with Swarm, if anybody's wondering how these are created. And I just upload them so I can share them. So across the top, okay, so we have different seeds. And these were on the left-hand side, you'll see. So this is my version 4 that I did on the CivitAI site. That was the final epoch. I think, I don't remember when I had that set to 25. 25. So this one was 21. But as we go back, you'll notice at 17, they're larger. 13, same idea. It does seem, if we went, let's go to the next one. So that's the same with this one here. We have the smaller ones later on. So same. Now this one we didn't see as much, but still these are smaller than these guys. So I want to explore that further. But that was so that was a different one. That's the one I did on CivitAI. So my other trick was using Magnific. A lot of especially the early images, I wasn't happy with the detail from those images. This is like one of the earlier ones. Took it from, still looking pretty plastic then. This is probably another really good example. That helped out quite a bit. Same with this one, really improves upon it. Downfall is Magnific does take a decent amount of credits. I'm pretty much out of credits, so I may have to look at other options there. But it allowed me to take these images and just, improve the quality enough so the source material was better, and then go from there. Because then that would shrink them back down, but it's going to improve I always find it improves the quality because it gives more details of the facial features and everything else. So that's what I've been doing. I don't know if these are the best steps, but this seemed like a good idea. So that was the step just before I fed them into Flux Gym. So back to Flux Gym. That's what I ended up training the many people in that I have released. And so what I would do is once I had the images that I wanted, so let's start off. So I give myself a name. Now, this is the other thing. I created a trigger word. Wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. Probably should have just used miniature. honestly, all the ones I've done now have been using that, but that doesn't seem to have much effect on the LoRa yet. I haven't fully tested. I don't really use it because I find the word miniature just works, because that's how I tagged everything. And then we'll do sample every 250, let's say. Now, I also did mine at 1024. I don't know what's better, but for this, I want to get these as high quality as possible. So 1024. Don't mind it taking longer, but it does definitely take much longer doing it that way. And I also train this on a 3080 with 10 gigabytes that I primarily was training this on. So I was running that overnight. One of them actually took a day, but and I experimented with a lot of different settings, but I ended up sticking for this, what I ended up releasing. It was pretty much the standard. So I just found when I did this, didn't have all these features when I was doing some of the earlier ones. And I do notice it's now been added. You can post them onto Hugging Face. I haven't had a chance to try that out yet. Now, once I have that all set up, I find it's best to do, if you're going to use a trigger word and you want it in there, you want to do it before you drop the images in. Then we drop these in. Now, like I said, when I initially started, I started off with a fewer pictures and I built my way up. I built one LoRa, got some good images out of that, which was difficult. And I will now I have all my images in here, and then I just click on add AI captions. Now, depending on what you're doing, those might be fine. The problem was with what I was doing here, I wanted to be very specific because I didn't know what the best way to do this would be, but I wanted to make sure it understood what these images are supposed to be, because by default, it's not going to mention that they're miniature. And I wasn't sure what would happen if I just had the trigger word and all that. So I ended up, when I trained my first one, I stuck with how I did it in the first one, which was this way that I'm going to show you, only because it was working, and because it was working, I stuck with it. I'm going to experiment with some other ideas coming up with the future versions. So at this point, I would just go through all these now, and then I was manually editing these. So I add a miniature football player. That'll be fine there. And then I'd put a miniature girl. Occasionally, I'd get one in here that would say a miniature, but not normally. Don't mind my spelling, it's horrible. My fingers don't work well with the keyboard for some reason lately, and brain, they just don't connect right. So I just went through and I added things to make sure that each one of these captions was accurate, and it wasn't saying things like standing near a giant football, because no, that's actually supposed to be a standard size football. I wanted to understand that it's just a miniature person, because that's really what this goal was, is if you type in a miniature person into these models, it gives you a plastic looking person. So that's what I'm trying to overcome. I don't know if this is the best method, but this is the way I did it. And I just went through them all, did that, and pretty much that's it. I stuck with these settings. Oh, I did go through and adjust these. So I think the one I ended up with was around 2,200 steps, something like that. And the more pictures I had, the less times I was repeating them. So by the last one, I was up to 30 something images in my last training of the one that I released, version 1. And that one I probably did 3 or 4 repeats on each one. I ended up using the file that was around 2,200 steps. I do tend to train mine longer because because I leave them going overnight. So a lot of times I kind of just say, well, why not do a few more epochs, just because it's not going to hurt at that point. So, and I can always pull an earlier one and use that. And that was pretty much it for what I would do. And then I just go ahead and start training. I do want to mention, some people do run into an error that exits right after unless they start using it. I would go onto the GitHub and look on there, because other people have there's been a few issues I've seen people have, and going onto GitHub is going to be your best way to go on and find anything like that for support. But one of them had to do with dual GPUs, things like that. So once I had that done, then I just went ahead and just hit start. Once you hit start, depending on your system, will determine how quickly it's going to go. This is a 4070 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. One thing to keep in mind, depending on how much resources you have, this can take long, be very quick, or it can take a while. The biggest thing I recommend doing is bringing up your task manager and going into GPU. And if you're not sure if things are happening, just watch in here. Now, if you have Pinocchio up and running here on the screen, it is going to use this GPU resources up here. It really probably shouldn't affect things. I figure minimize it. Why put any extra strain on it? Have less resources. Same with everything else. Those things that you don't need to use. But keep an eye on this, because you're not going to see Flux Gym will not update once it gets to a certain point until each epoch's done, and then it will give a quick update, or when it does the sample images, which will show up at the bottom. Those are the two times that you're going to see the updates on the primary screen. Otherwise, no. If you have a slow GPU like me, I sometimes wouldn't see an update for an hour or so. And if you're running even lower settings, like a 3060 or whatever, you may want to try training at lower number of steps and see if they come out, because depending on what you're doing, I found certain things you don't need as many steps. So don't always assume you have to do a ton of steps. And the 512 for the image size, I did the train my other one. I did that. It worked very well, because that I didn't need it. I didn't feel I needed a high quality thing, because that was actually, it was a very low quality item. And that's pretty much all I did. I just went through. Once this is done, it's going to be in the outputs folder, and I just go in there. If I want to try any of the earlier ones, as I mentioned in my previous video, you can grab one of these earlier ones and use those. Try it out. That's what I do when I'm running mine. I pull those out because mine goes pretty slow, and I set it for extra, and I set it in there to save usually on every two epochs in the settings. That way I can keep testing it as you go. You could do every single one if you want. And so that's where I'm at on the training of that. This is the Miniature People one. Definitely post your images. I like seeing the images people create on here, which aren't showing at the moment. So hopefully they get that fixed soon. But my other one that I was using there is, where is it? The hyper detailed illustration one I created. Now, this one I've been using. It adds at a low weight. It adds a little bit of detail to the photos, photorealistic ones that I find can definitely help a little bit, give it a little bit more detail. I have some ideas for this. So, because one thing it is kind of weak at, close-up shots, even when I use like extreme close-up, things like that. It's rare that I get them, but I do on occasion. I do have to prompt certain ways. You definitely, with this one, I have to still describe the scene usually. I don't like to say giant stuff, because that hints that I want it to understand that it's in a minute, that it's a miniaturized person. So when I prompt and I describe the scene, I usually describe it enough. Like this one, standing on an Oreo cookie. I didn't say standing on an oversized or a large or anything like that. Now, I might say that something's towering over or stuff like that to try to give it more of a scale that I want, because it is a little tricky getting the scale that I want. And that's another thing I'd like to experiment with and potentially come up with a way of improving on that. But at the moment, I'm not 100% sure if I can do that. But yeah, that's one of the downfalls I need to work on. And I think that had to do with a lot of my training data. Same thing, I get a lot of plaid, I get a lot of certain things, same people. So one of the biggest things that I'm working on for my next data set is I'm trying to get a lot of variety in just the overall people and clothing and everything else. I'm going to get rid of the plaid. I definitely going to work on that plaid. So that, I think, covers things so far. I do plan on exploring this LoRa in more detail in the future if things continue to improve with it. And if you have any tips on creating LoRa's, or I know many of you probably do, please leave in the comments. If you do grab my LoRa and try it, please post any good images you create on the CivitAI site. so I can use them for ideas, maybe on how to improve the model. And if anyone wants to buy me a cup of electricity, I do have links in the description. And I do want to give a shout out to South Bay Jay for all his help in learning to train these and bouncing ideas back and forth as we've both been learning. So do go on there. He's got some pretty interesting ones. He's got some other ones in the works. He's got some pretty good ideas. Check those out. If you found this video useful, please do consider hitting the like button. And thanks for watching, and have fun creating.